Given that the series is still ongoing, there are a wide variety of highly varied opinions regarding the future of the Song of Ice and Fire. 50 different people could have written the Pink Letter, no one knows who poisoned the locusts, and the fates of many crucial characters are very different depending upon who you ask. With all that said, one element seems to be agreed upon by all fans, and this future fact has seemingly been set in stone since the publication of A Dance with Dragons in 2011. That being that Jon Snow, who dies in his final point of view chapter, will someday return from the dead. For those who might not have read A Dance with Dragons in the past dozen years or so, one of the final chapters in this novel contains the mutiny at Castle Black, where several brothers band together to assassinate Lord Commander Jon Snow for a variety of reasons. In the show, it's mostly because of the wildlings, while in the book, that is a massive factor in building tension at the wall, but the primary spark for this mutiny is quite different. Jon receives the aforementioned pink letter, which supposedly contains news of Stannis' defeat at Ramsay's Hand. Jon then pledges to ride south, effectively abandoning his post as leader of the Watch, which results in him winning several new stab wounds from some of his brothers. While people generally believe that Jon will return from this stabbing somehow, I've seen a great deal of variation in terms of how he'll come back, in addition to the when and why of that issue. So today I'll be examining exactly that. We'll take a look at the methods of resurrection present in A Song of Ice and Fire, and assess how likely each of these may be in returning the former Lord Commander to life, as well as how they may play out in the story as a whole. The first thing to do is examine the how of this potential magical miracle. Resurrection is a fairly well established form of magic throughout the song, and examining the precedents from earlier in the story could give some indication as to the future of Lord Snow. I do realize in reading the script right now that my law school language is starting to bleed into my Song of Ice and Fire videos, but that's fine. The only other example of a point of view character's resurrection also happened to be the character who hated Jon the most out of all of the point of view characters, that being Catelyn Stark. Catelyn's resurrection seems to have the potential to parallel Jon's in a number of ways. Firstly, their manner of death is quite similar. Both characters were unexpectedly betrayed before being killed by daggers, though a slash wound for Catelyn and stabs for Jon. What's more, their path after death seems to tie in symbolically to their homes. Catelyn Tully of Riverrun is thrown into a river after her demise, and Jon dies in the snow, perhaps being stored in the ice cells following his wounds, paralleling his being raised at Winterfell and his Stark heritage. We also see some pretty major changes upon Catelyn's return. In fact, she's no longer even Catelyn. She's a vengeful spirit known as Lady Stoneheart, rendered virtually mute and driven purely by the desire to avenge her son. In a meta sense, she's also ceased serving as a point of view character upon her death. These patterns have created speculation regarding Jon's return, specifically that he might somehow be changed by the experience of returning from the grave, as he probably should be. Though you'd have to have a stone heart to not subscribe. I make a ton of A Song of Ice and Fire content, and I promise I won't make any more jokes that bad if you specifically subscribe. Also, liking the video helps a lot, and I would really appreciate it. Jon has served as a central viewpoint ever since the first novel in the series. That said, his death marks a distinct endpoint in the journey he started into Game of Thrones. That, combined with Cat not returning as a point of view, has led fans to speculate that Jon Snow might not be a point of view character in the Winds of Winter. The mechanics of this idea are pretty solid. While Jon's viewpoint has been our only perspective on the wall for about 4 books, we now have Melisandre's perspective there as well from Dance, and we will likely have Davos returning as well at some point later in the Winds of Winter. Martin doesn't tend to like to kill off point of view characters unless there are other point of view characters around, and this seems to be a large reason as to why. Keeping Jon's internal thoughts a mystery following his death would certainly add a new layer of intrigue to politics in the North. And personally, I quite like this idea going into the book in which he might be the most important out of the series so far. Another, more minor potential parallel to Stoneheart is the theory that Jon's appearance might change following his demise. Stoneheart went through a drastic change in appearance, and the primary point of fixation for readers seems to be the idea that, like Stoneheart, a resurrected Jon Snow's hair could turn white. This would be pretty neat, and not just as a visible indicator of change and a cool character design. White hair would bring him more in line with what's typical of his Targaryen heritage. It might even represent connections to other areas of his heritage, notably the direwolf ghost and the weirwood trees stemming from his mother Lyanna. Catelyn Stark remained dead for 3 days prior to her resurrection. While Jon could do the same, particularly if Martin wants to lean into a Christ-like savior vibe, I personally don't think that Jon Snow's resurrection will take place until a decent way into the Winds of Winter. The beginning of this book is going to be packed with 4 massive battles, and because of that, I wouldn't be surprised if Jon stayed dead for a quarter or even a third of the novel's overall page count. With all of the Stoneheart parallels and meta-analysis covered, let's move on to the methods of resurrection that exist within George R. R. Martin's story itself. The first type is the most common we've seen throughout the series, that being resurrection by the Lord of Light. Beric Dondarrion is our primary example of this magical effect. He's resurrected a total of 6 times throughout the series, each time by Thoros of Myr. Thoros is a priest of R'hllor, and we know from his own testimony that he did not intend to resurrect Beric the first time at all. In fact, all Thoros did was issue a death rite of the fire god, known as the Last Kiss. This comes to be known as the Kiss of Life by the Brotherhood Without Banners, and it continually returns their leader to this mortal coil after a number of devastating injuries and deaths. However, the Lightning Lord dies a final time late into a storm of swords, choosing to pass on his kiss of life unto Catelyn Stark, resurrecting her as Lady Stoneheart. That's the most recent resurrection by fire we've seen in our story, though the Lord of Light seems to work in a variety of other strange magic. He can create shadow baby assassins and make people's fists really strong and cool and Azor Ahai-like. Melisandre, the main prominent supporter of this deity in the story, is currently both at the wall and a point of view character. She even remarks that her magic seems to be stronger at the edge of the world. As has happened in the show, she might be a prime candidate to return the Lord Commander to life. However, there are some problems with this approach. The first of these is that Mel doesn't have the knowledge of Barrack's or Catelyn's resurrections. Based on her point of view chapter, it seems as though she has no idea whatsoever that her god can return people to life. What's more, Jon's resurrection in the snow really wouldn't be a good guidepost for book events. A massive theme in Martin's writing is magic having a price, and Jon Snow's cost of resurrection being simply a haircut is completely antithetical to that idea. One of my favorite quotes from Martin's work is that magic is a sword with no hilt. There's no safe way to grasp it. I'm also going to do something that you're never going to see again in the Song of Ice and Fire community and shoot down one of my own theories. A year ago or so, I posited that Melisandre would glamour herself as Davos and use that cover to burn Shireen and resurrect Jon. Go watch that video if you'd want more details and mechanics on exactly how that would play out, and if you'd want to see me be wrong, which will never happen again. However, we do know that Martin gave the showrunners a few notes on later seasons' plot points, one of which is Shireen's death. However, there is a crucial detail that I overlooked in making that video. Whenever Gurm discusses that plot point, he always mentions Stannis' choice to burn Shireen. This is going to be a tragic decision rooted in delusion or necessity, and it's going to have an enormous emotional impact on the story. That impact will be greatly diminished if Melisandre burns Shireen hundreds of miles away from her father, without the one true king's knowledge. I do think the young princess will be burned, and perhaps Melisandre will still disguise herself as Davos to do so, but I don't think it'll be done to bring Jon Snow back to life at the beginning of the Winds of Winter. We've talked about fire resurrection, so let's turn to ice resurrection. We've seen corpses transform into whites within Castle Black all the way back in A Game of Thrones, so some fans have speculated that Jon may soon do the same. However, those corpses were killed by others north of the Wall, whereas Jon was killed by regular dudes south of the Wall. It doesn't seem particularly likely that he'll be brought back as an other, unless there are superseding forces and winds that might not have been anticipated as of yet, namely a much quicker White Walker invasion than anybody's anticipating. There's also water resurrection, kinda. Patchface seems as though he might have been revived by the drowned god, what with the prophecies and the being horrifying and all that. So it's at least another option of resurrection that probably exists in this universe. Maybe Cat and Jon are meant to be parallel opposite, kind of reverse mirrors. Cat is revived by a fire kiss of life, and Jon is resurrected by a water kiss of life. Winds of Winter prediction, Jon and Patchface will kiss. Joking aside, there are at least two other angles to Jon's return that seem worth considering. The first doesn't seem particularly likely for the future of the story, but there's a lot of evidence that this was Martin's plan at least one point in the story's development. Reddit user GSteph unearthed a bunch of Martin's early drafts from a college library in Texas, and within these drafts there are a plethora of unpublished materials, many of which contain details and ideas that Martin eventually changed. I'll link to his posts in the description. They're well worth the read if you have the time. In these earlier drafts, we have a number of visions that ended up getting altered or cut from A Dance with Dragons, specifically visions of Jon's where he unconsciously goes into the mind of his direwolf ghost. This kind of touches on this warg connection between the two of them that is magically formed throughout the books, and overall the theme of these changes seem to be centering around a connection between Ghost and Summer, this direwolf sibling that is owned by Bran Stark and currently in a cave with Bloodraven. Specifically, Ghost seems to be seeking out Summer throughout the entirety of A Dance with Dragons in the drafts, running up and down the wall in order to try to find a way through to get to Summer. The thought posited by GSteph in this post is that perhaps in an earlier draft, Jon was intended to go north of the wall after being killed, perhaps in Ghost's body having warged into him, and attempting to reach Bloodraven in order to somehow be repaired or be returned to life. We do know that Brynden Rivers seems to have some sort of resurrection ability in some capacity at least. Cold Hands, who I have another video on that you can check out, is someone who is long dead according to Bran and Jojen, but does continue to walk around and function in the world. However, it does seem as though Cold Hands is directly controlled by Bloodraven, so that could be why Martin ended up shifting it. He wanted Jon to retain some agency and not just be a puppet of this kind of master magical chess player all the time. Though it could be interesting if Bran ends up taking over that role and if Jon ends up somehow connected to Bran or otherwise influenced by him. That said, the fact that this is all contained in earlier drafts of the story makes it seem quite unlikely to be the actual path that Martin will take forward in The Winds of Winter, given that all of the foreshadowing and setup for it has been omitted from A Dance with Dragons. The last option is pretty simple. It's just that Jon might not be entirely dead. He is stabbed, and we see him go down, pass out into the snow, but his last word is ghost, and we don't really see the body after that, given that it's the third to last chapter of the book. That has led some fans to speculate that maybe the cold nature of his surroundings and the fact that he fell into ice could have in some way preserved him or otherwise sent him into a comatose state rather than killing him outright. What's more, his consciousness could have gone into that of his direwolf, as we see in the A Dance with Dragons prologue. The point of that prologue seems to be paralleling Varamir Sixskins with Jon Snow, as both of them seem to go into direwolves after a fatal or near fatal event that causes them to pretty much die. Specifically, the thought there seems to be that Jon will return to life through just some manual repair or maybe magical repair of his wounds. The fact that his heart could still be beating and his consciousness could just hop back from Ghost into his body regardless. I do think that the fact that Jon went into Ghost's body after his death is probably the least disputable factor in the events surrounding his death and following it, as his last word being Ghost is a fairly strong tip-off, especially given the fact that prologue of A Dance with Dragons is very directly paralleling the death of Jon Snow in its third to last chapter. Overall, assessing all of these methods of resurrection, I think that the most likely element is Melisandre doing something magical to repair his body and his consciousness returning from Ghost after some time. That said, I do think it will take probably about a quarter of the book to get there, and he might not return as a point of view character when it's all said and done. Though it would be cool to see him return in A Dream of Spring after everything has ended. So this has been the video on Jon's death. What do you think? How do you think he'll return? Do you think he'll just be like the show? He'll be fine. He'll just be kind of chilling for a little bit and come back. Do you think it'll be some other form of magic that I've somehow forgotten? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. While you're down there, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. It really helps me grow the channel, and I really appreciate it. I took a week off last week, but I should be back to normal now. I'm getting back into the swing of things, and I am in midterm season for law school, but it should still hopefully be fine. I'm sure it'll be fine. I will talk to you all soon, and thank you again for watching. Goodbye.